Alrighty, sorry about the delay, folks. Welcome back to Mecha Mondays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Pilot Fraggot, and today we're going to do more of Magic Incorporated, the second story in the science fiction double feature by Robert Heinlein, Waldo, and Magic Incorporated, or Waldo Genius in Orbit, and I think there might be one other title that I saw out there from a more recent edition. At any rate, so Waldo was the main reason we did this for Mecha Mondays, as I've said before, um, because of its obvious direct mechanical applications to the concept. Magic Incorporated is more an exercise in, say you have magic, let's pretend it's normal, which I think is applicable broadly to giant robots as well, because in order to make cool humanoid robots viable, I think you do have to have a certain element of magic or something treating a strange thing as normal in order to make that seem like a believable setting, which this ultimately does. So for this, previously on, let's see, our protagonist, whose name eludes me at the moment, um, Archibald Fraser, has gotten his shop back after it was destroyed in a what is that called? Oh wow, protection racket. Was destroyed due to a protection racket. They do eventually catch up with the individual who approached him first from the racket. He and his friend Jedson, Archibald Fraser, approach this guy whose name I don't know. I don't think they ever say his name, actually. He's swarthy, though. He's definitely swarthy. And they approach him and they capture him and they interrogate him. And he's like, I don't know nothing. I don't know nothing. And it's like, well, actually, he knows a couple things, but not a lot. He doesn't know names, which isn't especially helpful. And then, of course, he gets murdered right after he leaves them out on the street, like half a block away. So whoever is running this racket that this guy was a part of takes it rather seriously and does not take well to squealers. We have also, just before we left, learned there is this, what is it called? Oh, come on now. Magic Incorporated. Um, a Magic Incorporated, Suite 700, Commonwealth Building. And we've learned that Ditworth is who we've had brief interactions with before, and he's not that great a guy. Seems kind of skeezy, to be honest. Sort of like a scumbag, maybe, possibly, maybe not a great person. Um, he's ultimately behind it. This Magic Incorporated business, and to quote the book, of course not, Zach, but what's it all about? Read it. Go ahead. He shoved the letter back at me. I opened it. The paper was a fine quality, watermarked, rag bond, and the letterhead was chaste and dignified. I glanced over the stuffed shirt committee and was quite agreeably impressed by the caliber of men that they had as officers and directors. Big men, all of them, except for a couple of names among the executives that I did not recognize. The letter itself amounted to an advertising prospectus. It was a new idea. I suppose you could call it a holding company for magicians. They offered to provide any and all kinds of magical service. The customer could dispense with shopping around. He could call this one number, state his needs, and the company would supply the service and bill him. It seemed fair enough, no more than an incorporated agency. I glanced on down. Fully guaranteed service backed by the entire assets of a responsible company. Surprisingly low standard fees, made possible by elimination of fee splitting with agents and by centralized administration. The gratifying response from the members of the great profession enables us to predict that Magic Incorporated will be the natural source to turn to for competent thaumaturgy in any line, probably the only source of truly first-rate magic. Which sounds an awful lot like shuck and jive. Possibly even snake oil. Possibly even um, antitrust, maybe. I don't think they've gotten that far in the setting, to be honest. Anyway, then they learn that Ditworth is basically one of the minds behind all this, and they don't like Ditworth. So did they say to hook up with? No, he's still with Feldstein. Uh, so our boy Archibald Fraser is with Feldstein and says, "Hey, um, why don't we go out, grab lunch, and head to this Chamber of Commerce, and then we'll check this thing out." Because a company like this might be able to squeeze us pretty bad, because we do magic as a matter of course. Anyway, that I think catches us up pretty well, and let's get cracking. I'm going to get some water in me, and we'll do it to it. We were a little late and had to take separate seats. The treasurer stuck the kitty under my nose and twisted her tail. He wanted a 10-cent fine from me for being late. The kitty is an ordinary frying pan with a mechanical bicycle bell mounted on the handle. We pay all fines on the spot, which is good for the treasury and a source of innocent amusement. The treasurer shoves the pan at you and rings the bell until you pay up. I hastily produced a dime and dropped it in. Steve Harris, who has an automobile agency, yelled, "That's right, make the Scotchman pay up!" and threw a roll at me. 10 cents for this order, announced our chairman, Norman Summers, without looking up. The treasurer put the B on Steve. I heard the coin clink into the pan. Then the bell was rung again. "What's the trouble?" "What's the trouble?" asked Summers.
"More of Steve's tricks," the treasurer reported in a tired voice. "Fairy gold this time."
Steve had chucked in a synthetic coin that some friendly magician had made up for him. Naturally, when it struck cold iron, it melted away. 2 bits more for counterfeiting, decided Summers. Then handcuff him and ring up the United States Attorney. Steve is quite a card, but he does not put much over on Norman. "Can't I finish my lunch first?" asked Steve in tones that simply dripped with fake self-pity. "Can't I finish my lunch first?" That's better. Norman ignored him, and he paid up.
"Steve, better have fun while you still can," commented Al Donahue, who runs a string of drive-in restaurants. "When you sign up with Magic Incorporated, you will have to cut out playing tricks with magic."
I sat up and listened. Who said I was going to sign up with him?
Huh? Of course you are. It's the logical thing to do. Don't be a dope.
Why should I?
Why should you? Why, it's the direction of progress, man. Take my case. I put out the fanciest line of vanishing desserts of any eating place in town. You can eat 3 of them if you like, not feel full and not gain an ounce. Now, I've been losing money on them, but kept them for advertising because of the way they bring in the women's trade. Now, Magic Incorporated comes along and offers me the same thing at a price I can make money with them too. Naturally, I signed up. You would? Suppose they raise the prices on you after they have hired or driven out of business every competent wizard in town.
If this doesn't sound slightly familiar, might could be you haven't paid attention to the streaming industry. Donahue laughed in a superior, irritating way.
I've got a contract.
So, how long does it run? And did you read the cancellation clause? I knew what he was talking about, even if Donahue didn't. I had been through it. About 5 years ago, a Portland cement firm came into town and began buying up the little dealers and cutting prices against the wrist. They ran 60 cent to they ran 60 cent to This is not hard to say. It's not, I promise. Because it says they ran 60-cent cement. Ooh, that is hard to say. I take it back. They ran 60-cent cement, 60-cent cement, 60-cent cement, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60-cent cement. Whew, sorry. They ran 60-cent cement down to 35 cents a sack and broke their competitors. Then they jacked it back up by easy stages until cement sold for $1.25. The boys took a whipping before they knew what had happened to them. We all had to shut up about then, for the guest speaker, old B.J. Timken, the big subdivider, started in. He spoke on cooperation and service. Although he is not exactly a scintillating speaker, he had some very inspiring things to say about how businessmen could serve the community and help each other. I enjoyed it. After the clapping died down, Norman Summers, that's Somers, I believe that's pronounced Somers, thanked BJ and said, "That's all for today, gentlemen, unless there is some new business to bring before the house." Jedson got up. I was sitting with my back to him, and had not known he was present.
I think there is, Mr. Chairman. A very important matter. I ask the indulgence of the chair for a few minutes of informal discussion.
Somers answered, "Certainly, Joe, if you've got something important."
Thanks, I think it is. This is really an extension of the discussion between Al Donahue and Steve Harris earlier in the meeting. I think there has been a major change in business conditions going on in this city right under our noses, and we haven't noticed it, except where it directly affected our own businesses. I refer to the trade in commercial magic. How many of you use magic in your business? Put your hands up.
All the hands went up, except for a couple of lawyers. Personally, I had always figured they were magicians themselves.
Okay, Judson went on. Put them down. We knew that. We all use it. I use it for textiles. Hank Manning here uses nothing else for cleaning and pressing, and probably uses it for some of his dye jobs, too. Wally Hates' maple shop uses it to assemble and finish the fine furniture. Stan Robertson will tell you that Le Bon Marché's slick window displays are thrown together with spells, as well as 2/3 of the merchandise in his store, especially in the kids' toy department. Now, I want to ask you another question. How many cases is the percentage of your cost charged to magic greater than your margin of profit? Think about it for a moment before answering.
He paused, then said,
"All right, put up your hands."
Nearly as many hands went up as before. In how many cases is the percentage of your costs charged to magic greater than your margin of profit? There we go. Nearly as many hands went up as before.
That's the point of the whole matter. We've got to have magic to stay in business. If anyone gets a stranglehold on magic in this community, we are all at his mercy. We would have to pay any prices that are handed us, charge the prices we are told to, and take what profits we are allowed to, or go out of business.
The chairman interrupted him.
"Just a minute, Joe. Just a minute, Joe. Granting it that what you say is true, it is, of course. Do you have any reason to feel that we are confronted with any particular emergency in the matter?"
Yes, I do have.
Joe's voice was low and very serious.
Little reasons, most of them, but they add up to convince me that someone is engaged in a conspiracy in restraint of trade.
Jedson ran rapidly over the history of Ditworth's attempts to organize magicians and their clients into an association, presumably to raise the standards of the profession, and how, alongside the non-profit association, had suddenly appeared a capital corporation which was already in a fair way to becoming a monopoly.
Wait a second, Joe,
Put in Ed Parmalee. Parmalee? Parmalee? Parmelee. I don't think I've ever seen that last name before. Shocking. Parmalee. We're going to go with that.
Wait a second, Joe,
Put in Ed Parmalee, who has a produce jobbing business.
I think that association is a fine idea. I was threatened by some rat who tried to intimidate me into letting him pick my magicians. I took it up with the association, and they took care of it. I didn't have any more trouble. I think an organization which can clamp down on racketeers is a pretty fine thing. You had to sign with the association to get their help, didn't you? Why, yes, but that's entirely reasonable. Isn't it possible that your gangster got what he wanted when you signed up? Why, that seems pretty far-fetched. I don't say, persisted Joe. That is the explanation, but it is a distinct. Oh, that is the explanation. That is the explanation, but it is a distinct possibility. It would not be the first time that monopolists used goon squads with their left hands to get by coercion what their right hands could not touch. I wonder whether any of the rest of you have had similar experiences.
It developed that several of them had. I could see them beginning to think. One of the lawyers present formally asked a question through the chairman. Mr. Chairman, passing for the moment from the association to Magic Incorporated, is this corporation anything more than a union of magicians? If so, have they a legal right to... No, there's no question mark there. If so, have they a legal right to organize? Norman turned to Jedson. Will you answer that, Joe?
Certainly. It is not a union at all. It is a parallel to a situation in which all the carpenters in town are employees of one contractor. You deal with that contractor, or you don't build.
Then it's a simple case of monopoly. If it is a monopoly, this state has a little Sherman Act. You can prosecute.
I think you will find that it is a monopoly. Have any of you noticed that there are no magicians present at today's meeting?
We all looked around. It was perfectly true.
I think you can expect, he added, to find magicians represented hereafter in this chamber by some executive of Magic Incorporated. With respect to the possibility of prosecution,
he hauled a folded newspaper out of his hip pocket.
Have any of you paid any attention to the governor's call for a special session of the legislature?
Al Donahue remarked superciliously that he was too busy making a living to waste any time on the political game. It was a deliberate dig at Joe, for everybody knew that he was a committee man, and spent quite a lot of time on civic affairs. The dig must have gotten under Joe's skin, for he said, pityingly,
Al, it's a damn good thing for you that some of us are willing to spend a little time on government, or you would wake up some morning to find they had stolen the sidewalks in front of your house.
The chairman rapped for order. Joe apologized. Donahue muttered something under his breath about the whole political business being dirty, and that anyone associated with it was bound to turn crooked. I reached out for an ashtray and knocked over a glass of water, which spilled into Donahue's lap. It diverted his mind. Joe went on talking.
Of course, we knew that a special session was likely for several reasons, but when they published the agenda of the call last night, I found tucked away toward the bottom an item, Regulation of Thaumaturgy. I couldn't believe that there was any reason to deal with such a matter in a special session unless something was up. I got on the phone last night and called a friend of mine at the Capitol, a fellow committee member. She did not know anything about it, but she called me back later. Here's what she found out. The item was stuck into the agenda at the request of some of the governor's campaign backers. He has no special interest in it himself. Nobody seems to know what it is all about, but one bill on the subject has already been dropped in the hopper.
There was an interruption. Somebody wanted to know what the bill said.
I'm trying to tell you. Joe said patiently. The bill was submitted by title alone. We won't be likely to know its contents until it is taken up in committee. But here is the title. A bill to establish professional standards for thaumaturgists, regulate the practice of the thaumaturgic profession, provide for the appointment of a commission to examine, license, and administer, and so on. As you can see, it isn't even a proper title. It's just an omnibus. It's just an omnibus onto which they can hang any sort of legislation regarding magic, including an abridgment of anti-monopoly regulation if they choose.
There was a short silence after this. I think all of us were trying to make up our minds on a subject that we were not really conversant with. Politics. Presently, someone spoke up and said,
Well, what do you think we ought to do about it? Well, he answered, we at least ought to have our own representative at the Capitol to protect us in the clinches. Besides that, we at least ought to be prepared to submit our own bill, if this one has any tricks in it, and bargain for the best compromise we can get. We should at least get an implementing amendment out of it that would put some real teeth into the State Antitrust Act, at least insofar as magic is concerned.
He grinned.
That's 4 at leasts, I think.
FOUR, at least.
Why can't the State Chamber of Commerce handle it for us? They maintain a legislative bureau. Sure, they have a lobby, but you know perfectly well that the State Chamber doesn't see eye to eye with us little businessmen. We can't depend on them. We may actually be fighting them.
There was quite a powwow after Joe sat down. Everybody had his own ideas about what to do, and tried to express them all at once. It became evident that there was no general agreement, whereupon Summers adjourned the meeting with the announcement that those interested in sending a representative to the Capitol should stay. A few of the diehards like Donahue left, and the rest of us reconvened with Somers again in the chair. It was suggested that Jedson should be the one to go, and he agreed to do it. Feldstein got up and made a speech with tears in his eyes. He wandered and did not seem to be getting any place, but finally he managed to get out that Jedson would need a good big war chest to do any good at the Capitol, and also should be compensated for his expenses and loss of time. At that, he astounded us by pulling out a roll of bills, counting out $1,000, and shoving it over in front of Joe. That display of sincerity caused him to be made finance chairman by general consent, and the subscriptions came in very nicely. I held down my natural impulses and matched Feldstein's donation, though I did wish he had not been quite so impetuous. I think Feldstein had a slight change of heart a little later, for he cautioned Joe to be economical and not waste a lot of money buying liquor for
those schlemiels at the Capitol.
Jedson shook his head at this, and said that while he intended to pay his own expenses, he would have to have a free hand in the spending of the fund, particularly with respect to entertainment. He said the time was too short to depend on sweet reasonableness and disinterested patriotism alone, that some of those lunkheads had no more opinions than a weather vane, and would vote to favor the last man they had had a drink with. Yeah, sounds about right. Somebody made a shocked remark about bribery.
I don't intend to bribe anyone, Jedson answered with a brittle note in his voice. If it comes to swapping bribes, we're licked to start with. I am just praying that there are still enough unpledged votes up there to make a little persuasive talking and judicious browbeating worthwhile.
He got his own way, but I could not help agreeing privately with Feldstein, and I made a resolution to pay a little more attention to politics thereafter. I did not even know the name of my own legislator. How did I know whether or not he was a high-caliber man or just a cheap opportunist? And that is how Jedson, Bodie, and myself happened to find ourselves on the train, headed for the Capitol. Bodie went along because Jedson wanted a first-rate magician to play bird dog for him. He said he did not know what might turn up. I went along because I wanted to. I had never been to the Capitol before, except to pass through, and was interested to see how this law-making business is done. Jedson went straight to the Secretary of State's office to register as a lobbyist, while Jack and I took our baggage to the Hotel Constitution and booked some rooms. Mrs. Logan, Joe's friend the committee woman, showed up before he got back. Jetson had told us a great deal about Sally Logan during the train trip. He seemed to feel that she combined the shrewdness of Machiavelli with the great-hearted integrity of Oliver Wendell Holmes. Oliver Wendell Holmes. I was surprised at his enthusiasm, for I have often heard him grouse about women in politics.
But you don't understand, Archie, he elaborated. Sally isn't a woman politician. She is simply a politician and asks no special consideration because of her sex. She can stand up and trade punches with the toughest manipulators on the Hill. What I said about women politicians is perfectly true as a statistical generalization, but it proves nothing about any particular woman.
Oh boy. So I've mentioned this on previous streams involving our boy Robert Heinlein, but let it be made clear. The views of the characters in the fictional work of the fictional characters in the work of fiction do not necessarily reflect the views of the person narrating, nor do they necessarily reflect the views of the author, although in this case they probably do, because Heinlein was a certain way. Also, this was written back in the 40s. You could say shit like that. Pardon my French. People just said shit like that, and frankly, I don't agree with it. But we'll let him keep talking. I'm not going to censor it, because it is a artifact at this point, one would hope.
It's like this. Most women in the United States have a short-sighted
Oh God, it just gets better. Worse, so much worse. Oh no. Oh no. Uh, we're gonna keep going.
It's like this. Most women in the United States have a short-sighted peasant individualism resulting from the male-created romantic tradition of the last century. They were told that they were superior creatures, a little nearer to the angels than their menfolks. They were not encouraged to think, nor to assume social responsibility. It takes a strong mind to break out of that sort of conditioning, and most minds simply aren't up to it, male or female.
Jesus Christ, dude.
Consequently, women as electors are usually suckers for romantic nonsense. They can be flattered into misusing their ballot even more easily than men. In politics, their self-righteous feeling of virtue, combined with their essentially peasant training, resulted in their introducing a type of cut-rate petty chiseling that should make Boss Tweed spin in his coffin. But Sally's not like that. She's got a tough mind which could reject the hokum.
Jesus. So now that we got that out of the way, so this is one of the issues with reading Heinlein is you're going to run into stuff like that. And trust and believe, I haven't read the really outlandish shit that Heinlein has done on stream, and I probably won't. I think Stranger in a Strange Land has some merit as a wild thought exercise. But I don't know that you should take his ideas on how to, on his, his interpretation of free love all that seriously. Um, I, I, I think it's ill-advised. Uh, and that's not even going into the whatever you want to call, I shall fear no evil, which is probably my least favorite thing he's ever written. It's disappointing. It's disappointing. Um, anyway. You're not in love with her, are you?
Who, me? Sally's happily married and has two of the best kids I know.
What does her husband do?
Lawyer, one of the governor's supporters. Sally got started in politics through pinch hitting for her husband one campaign.
What is her official position up here?
None. Right hand for the governor. That's her strength. Sally has never held a patronage job nor been paid for her services.
Oh, women politicians are great if they're not being paid? Is that the message we're getting here? Come on now. Heine boy. Heine. Bobby H., you can do better. Uh, I had forgotten this particular bit. I wonder why. I forced it from my mind, probably. Sorry. Again, doesn't necessarily reflect my own views. Just putting it out there. Where were we? Oh, right.
None. Right hand for the governor. That's her strength. Sally has never held a patronage job nor been paid for her services.
After this build-up, I was anxious to meet the paragon. When she called, I spoke to her over the house phone and was about to say that I would come down to the lobby when she announced that she was coming up, and hung up. I was a little startled at the informality, not yet realizing that politicians did not regard hotel rooms as bedrooms, but as business offices. When I let her in, she said, "You're Archie Fraser, aren't you? I'm Sally Logan. Where's Joe?" "He'll be back soon. Won't you sit down and wait?" "Thanks." She plopped herself into a chair, took off her hat, and shook out her hair. I looked her over. I had unconsciously expected something pretty formidable in the way of a mannish matron. What I saw was a young, plump, cheerful-looking blonde with an untidy mass of yellow hair and frank blue eyes. She was entirely feminine, not over 30 at the outside, and there was something about her that was tremendously reassuring. She made me think of county fairs and well water and sugar cookies. What? "I'm afraid this is going to be a tough proposition," she began at once. "I don't think there was much interest in the matter, and I still don't think so. But just the same, someone has a solid block lined up for Assembly Bill 22. That's the bill I wired Joe about. What do you boys plan to do? Make a straight fight to kill it, or submit a substitute bill?" Judson drew up a Fair Practices Act with the aid of some of our half-world friends and a couple of lawyers. Would you like to see it? "Please. I stopped by the state printing office and got a few copies of the bill you are against, AB 22. We'll swap." I was trying to translate the foreign language lawyers use when they write statutes when Judson came in. He patted Sally's cheek without speaking, and she reached up and squeezed his hand and went on with her reading. He commenced reading over my shoulder. I gave up and let him have it. It made a set of building specifications look simple. Sally asked, "What do you think of it, Joe?"
Worse than I expected, he replied. Take paragraph 7.
"I haven't read it yet."
So? Well, in the first place, it recognizes the association as a semi-public body like the Bar Association or the Community Chest, and permits it to initiate actions before commission. That means that every magician had better be...
Oh, I know how to read. I got lost in the sentence. We're going to take the paragraph from the top. I'm sorry.
So, well, in the first place, it recognizes the association as a semi-public body, like the Bar Association or the Community Chest, and permits it to initiate actions before the commission. That means that every magician had better buy a damn sight belong to Ditworth's association and be careful not to offend it.
"But how can that be legal?" I asked. "It sounds unconstitutional to me. A private association like that."
Plenty of precedent, son. Corporations to promote World's Fairs, for example. They're recognized and even voted tax money. As for unconstitutionality, you'd have to prove that the law was not equal in application, which it isn't, but awfully hard to prove.
But anyhow, a witch gets a hearing before the commission?
Sure, but there is the rub. The Commission has very broad powers, almost unlimited powers over everything connected with magic. The bill is filled with phrases like reasonable and proper, which means the sky's the limit, with nothing but the good sense and decency of the commissioners to restrain them. That's my objection to commissions in government. The law can never be equal in application under them. They have delegated legislative powers, and the law is what they say it is. You might as well face a drumhead court-martial. There are 9 commissioners provided for in this case, 6 of which must be licensed magicians, first class.
I don't suppose it is necessary to point out that a few ill-advised appointments to the original commission will turn it into a tight little self-perpetuating oligarchy, through its power to license.
Sally and Joe were going over to see a legislator whom they thought might sponsor our bill, so they dropped me off at the Capitol. I wanted to listen to some of the debate. It gave me a warm feeling to climb up the big, wide steps of the State House. The old, ugly mass of masonry seemed to represent something tough in the character of the American people, the determination of free men to manage their own affairs. Our own current problem seemed a little smaller, not quite so overpoweringly important, still worth working on, but simply one example in a long history of the general problem of self-government. I noticed something else as I was approaching the great bronze doors. The contractor for the outer construction of the building must have made his pile. The mix for the mortar was not richer than 1-6. I decided on the Assembly rather than the Senate because Sally said they generally put on a livelier show. When I entered the hall, they were discussing a resolution to investigate the tarring and feathering the previous month of 3 agricultural worker organizers up near the town of 6 Points. Sally had remarked that it was on the calendar for the day, but that it would not take long because the proponents of the resolution did not really want it. However, the Central Labor Council had passed a resolution demanding it, and the labor-supported members were stuck with it. The reason why they could only go through the motions of asking for an investigation was that the organizers were not really human beings at all, but mandrakes, a fact that the State Council had not been aware of when they asked for the investigation. Since the making of mandrakes is the blackest kind of black magic, and highly illegal, they needed some way to drop it quietly. The use of mandrakes has always been opposed by organized labor because it displaces real men, men with families to support. But for the same reasons they oppose synthetic facsimiles and homunculi. But it is well known that the unions are not above using mandrakes or mandragoras, as well as facsimiles when it suits their purpose, such as for pickets, pressure groups, and the like. I suppose they feel justified in fighting fire with fire. Homunculi they can't use on account of their size, since they are too small to be passed off as men. If Sally had not primed me, I would not have understood what took place. Each of the labor members got up and demanded in forthright terms a resolution to investigate. When they were all through, someone proposed that the matter be tabled until the grand jury of the county concerned held its next meeting. This motion was voted on without debate and without a roll call, although practically no members were present except for those who had spoken in favor of the original resolution. The motion passed easily. There was the usual crop of oil industry bills on the agenda, such as you read about in the newspapers every time the legislature is in session. One of them was the next item on the day's calendar, a bill which proposed that the governor negotiate a treaty with the gnomes, under which the gnomes would aid the petroleum engineers in prospecting, and, in addition, would advise the humans in drilling methods, so as to maintain the natural gas pressure underground needed to raise the oil to the surface. I think that is the idea, but I am no petroleum engineer. The proponent spoke first.
Mr. Speaker, he said, I ask for a yes vote on this bill, AB 79. Its purpose is quite simple and the advantage is obvious. A very large part of the overhead cost of recovering crude oil from the ground lies in the uncertainties of prospecting and drilling. With the aid of the little people, this item can be reduced to an estimated 7% of its present dollar cost, and the price of gasoline and other petroleum products to the people can be greatly lessened. Unless, of course, they, as the corporation in question, decide to keep the prices high because, why not? The matter of underground gas pressure is a little more technical, but suffice it to say that it takes, in round numbers, 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas to raise 1 barrel of oil to the surface. If we can get intelligent supervision of drilling operations far underground, where no human being can go, we can make the most economical use of this precious gas pressure.
How long is this going to go on? Oh, yes, pages.
The only rational objection to this bill lies in whether or not we can deal with the gnomes on favorable terms. I believe that we can, for the administration has some excellent connections in the half-world. The gnomes are willing to negotiate in order to put a stop to the present condition of chaos in which human engineers drill blindly, sometimes wrecking their homes and not infrequently violating their sacred places. They not unreasonably claim everything under the surface as their kingdom, but are willing to make any reasonable concession to abate what is to them an intolerable nuisance. If this treaty works out well, as it will, we can expect to arrange other treaties, which will enable us to exploit all of the metal and mineral resources of this state under conditions highly advantageous to us and not hurtful to the gnomes. Imagine, if you please, having a gnome with his X-ray eyes peer into a mountainside and locate a rich vein of gold for you.
Huh. Oh, yes, there is certainly no way that this would be abused. No way. It seemed very reasonable, except that, having once seen the King of the Gnomes, I would not trust him very far, unless Mrs. Jennings did the negotiating. As soon as the proponent sat down, another member jumped up and just as vigorously denounced it. He was older than most of the members, and I judged him to be a country lawyer. His accent placed him in the northern part of the state, well away from the oil country.
Mr. Speaker, he bellowed, I ask for a vote of no. Who would dream that an American legislature who would dream that an American legislature would stoop to such degrading nonsense? Have any of you ever seen a gnome? Have you any reason to believe that gnomes exist? This is just a cheap piece of political chicanery to do the public out of its proper share of the natural resources of our great state.
He was interrupted by a question.
Does the honorable member from Lincoln County mean to imply that he has no belief in magic? Perhaps he does not believe in the radio or the telephone either.
Not at all. If the chair will permit, I will state my position so clearly that even my respected colleague on the other side of the House will understand it. There are certain remarkable developments in human knowledge and general use which are commonly referred to by the laity as magic. These principles are well understood and are taught, I am happy to say, in our great publicly owned institutions for higher learning. I have every respect for the legitimate practitioners thereof, but, as I understand it, although I am not myself a practitioner of the great science, there is nothing in it that requires a belief in the little people.
Oh, boy.
But let us stipulate, for the sake of argument, that the little people do exist. Is that any reason to pay them blackmail? Should the citizens of this commonwealth pay cumsha to the denizens of the underworld?
He waited for his pun to be appreciated. It wasn't.
For that which is legally and rightfully ours? If this ridiculous principle is pushed to its logical conclusion, the farmers and dairymen I am proud to number among my constituents will be required to pay toll to the elves before they can milk their cows.
Someone slid into the seat beside me. I glanced around, saw that it was Jedson, and questioned him with my eyes.
"Nothing doing now," he whispered. "We've got some time to kill, and might as well do it here."
And he turned to the debate. Somebody had gotten up to reply to the old duck with the Daniel Webster complex.
Mr. Speaker, if the honored member is quite through running with his Oh, geez Louise. Mr. Speaker, if the honored member is quite through with his speech, I did not quite catch what office he is running for. I would like to invite the attention of this body to the precedented standing in jurisprudence of... Oh, my golly, let's take this whole paragraph from the top. Mr. Speaker, if the honored member is quite through with his speech, I did not quite catch what office he is running for. I would like to invite the attention of this body to the precedented standing in jurisprudence of elements of every nature, not only in Mosaic law, Roman law, the English common law, but also in the appellate court of our neighboring state to the south. I am confident that anyone possessing even an elementary knowledge of the law will recognize the case I have in mind without citation, but for the benefit of...
Mr. Speaker, I move to amend by striking out the last word.
A stratagem to gain the floor, Joe whispered.
Is it the purpose of the honorable member who preceded me to imply...
It went on and on. I turned to Jedson and asked, I can't figure out this chap who's speaking. A while ago he was hollering about cows. What's he afraid of? Religious prejudices?
Partly that. He's from a very conservative district, but he's lined up with the independent oilmen. They don't want the state setting the terms. They think they can do better with the dealing with the... They don't want the state setting the terms. They think they can do better dealing with the gnomes directly.
But what interest has he got in oil? There's no oil in his district.
No, but there is outdoor advertising. The same holding company that controls the so-called independent oilmen holds a voting trust in the Countryside Advertising Corporation, and that can be awfully important to him around election time.
The speaker looked our way, and an assistant sergeant-at-arms threaded his way toward us. We shut up. Someone moved the order of the day, and the oil bill was put aside for one of the magic bills that had already come out of the committee. This was a bill to outlaw every sort of magic, witchcraft, or thaumaturgy. No one spoke for it but the proponent, who launched into a diatribe that was more scholarly than logical. He quoted extensively from Blackstone's Commentaries and the records of the Massachusetts trials, and finished up with his head thrown back, one favor waving wildly to heaven, and shouting,
Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live!
No one bothered to speak against it. It was voted on immediately without roll call, and, to my complete bewilderment, passed without a single nay. I turned to Jedson and found him smiling at the expression on my face.
It doesn't mean a thing, Archie, he said quietly.
Huh?
He's a party wheel horse who had to introduce that bill to please a certain block of his constituents.
You mean he doesn't believe in the bill himself?
Oh, no, he believes in it all right, but he also knows it is hopeless. It has evidently been agreed to let him pass it. It has evidently been agreed to let him pass it over here in the Assembly this session, so that he would have something to take home to his people. Now it will go to the Senate committee and die there. Nobody will ever hear of it again.
I guess my voice carries too well, for my reply got us a really dirty look from the speaker. We got up hastily and left. Once outside, I asked Joe what had happened that he was back so soon.
He would not touch it, he told me. Said that he couldn't afford to antagonize the association.
Does that finish us?
Not at all. Sally and I are going to see another member right after lunch. He's tied up in a committee meeting at the moment.
We stopped in a restaurant where Jedson had arranged to meet Sally Logan. Jedson ordered lunch, and I had a couple of cans of devitalized beer, insisting on their bringing it to the booth in the unopened containers. I don't like to get even a little bit tipsy, although I do like to drink. On another occasion, I had paid for the wizard processed liquor and had received intoxicating liquor On another occasion, I had paid for the wizard processed liquor and had received intoxicating liquor instead. Hence the unopened containers. I sat there, staring into my glass and thinking about what I had heard that morning, especially about the bill to outlaw all magic. The more I thought about it, the better the notion seemed. The country had gotten along all right in the old days before magic had become popular and commercially widespread. It was unquestionably a headache in many ways, even leaving out our present troubles with racketeers and monopolists. Finally, I expressed my opinion to Jedson. But he disagreed. According to him, prohibition never does work in any field. He said that anything which can be supplied and which people want will be supplied, law or no law. To prohibit magic would simply be to turn over the field to the crooks and the black magicians.
I see the drawbacks of magic as well as you do, he went on, but it is like firearms. Certainly guns made it possible for almost anyone to commit murder and get away with it, but once they were invented, the damage was done. All you can do is try to cope with it. Things like the Sullivan Act, they don't keep the crooks from carrying guns and using them. They simply took the guns out of the hands of honest people. It's the same with magic. If you prohibit it, you take from decent people the enormous boons to be derived from a knowledge of the great arcane laws, while the nasty, harmful secrets hidden away in black grimoires and red grimoires will still be bootlegged to anyone who will pay the price and has no respect for law. Personally, I don't believe that there was any less black magic practiced between, say, 1750 and 1950 than there is now, or was before then. Take a look at Pennsylvania and the Hex country. Take a look at the Deep South. But since that time we have begun to take advantages of white magic, too.
Sally came in, spotted us, and slid into one side of the booth.
My, she said with a sigh of relaxation, I've just fought my way across the lobby of the Constitution. The third house is certainly out in full force this trip. I've never seen 'em so thick, especially the women.
Third house? I said.
She means lobbyists, Archie, Jedson explained. Yes, I noticed them. I'd like to make a small bet that 2/3 of them are synthetic.
I thought I didn't recognize that many of 'em, Sally commented. Are you sure, Joe?
Not entirely, but Bodie agrees with me. He says that the women are almost all mandrakes, or androids of some sort. Real women are never quite so perfectly beautiful, nor so tractable. I've got him checking on them now.
In what way?
He says he can spot the work of most of the magicians capable of that high-powered stuff. If possible, we want to prove that all these androids were made by Magic Incorporated, although I'm not sure just what we can what why am I skipping over use? Although I'm not sure just what use we can make of the fact. Bodie has even located some zombies, he added.
Not really, exclaimed
Sally. She wrinkled her nose and looked disgusted.
Some people have odd tastes.
They started discussing aspects of politics that I know nothing about, while Sally put away a very sizable lunch topped off by a fudge ice cream cake slice. But I noticed that she ordered from the left-hand side of the menu, all vanishing items, like the alcohol in my beer. I found out more about the situation as they talked. When a bill is submitted to the legislature, it is first referred to a committee for hearings. Ditworth's bill, AB-22, had been referred to the Committee on Professional Standards. Over in the Senate, an identical bill had turned up and had been referred by the Lieutenant Governor, who presides in the Senate, to the Committee on Industrial Practices. Our immediate object was to find a sponsor for our bill, if possible, one for each house, and preferably sponsors who were members, in their respective houses, of the committees concerned. All of this needed to be done before Ditworth's bills came up for hearing. I went with them to see their second-choice sponsor for the Assembly. He was not on the Professional Standards Committee, but he was on the Ways and Means Committee, which meant that he carried a lot of weight in any committee. He was a pleasant chap named Spence, Luther B. Spence, and I could see that he was quite anxious to please Sally, for past favors, I suppose. But they had no more luck with him than with their first-choice man. He said that he did not have time to fight for our bill, as the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee was sick, and he was chairman pro tem. Sally put it to him flatly.
Look here, Luther, when you have needed a hand in the past, you have gotten it from me. I hate to remind a man of obligations, but you will recall that matter of the vacancy last year on the Fish and Game Commission. Now I want action on this matter, and not excuses.
Spence was plainly embarrassed.
Oh, Sally, please, don't feel like that. You're getting your feathers up over nothing. You know I'll always do anything I can for you, but you really don't need this. But you don't really need this, and it would necessitate my neglecting things that I can't afford to neglect.
What do you mean I don't need it?
I mean, you should not worry about AB-22. It's a cinch bill.
Jedson explained that term to me later. A cinch bill, he said, was a bill introduced for tactical reasons. The sponsors never intended to try to get it enacted into law, but simply used as a bargaining point. It's like an asking price in a business deal.
Are you sure of that?
Why, yes, I think so. The word has been passed around that there is another bill coming up that won't have the bugs in it that this bill has.
After we left Spence's office, Jedson said,
Sally, I hope Spence is right, but I don't trust Ditworth's intentions. He's out to get a stranglehold on the industry. I know it.
Luther usually has the correct information, Joe.
Yes, that is no doubt true, but this is a little out of his line. Anyhow, thanks, kid. You did your best.
Call on me if there is anything else, Joe, and come out to dinner before you go. You haven't seen Bill or the kids yet.
I won't forget.
Jedson finally gave up as impractical. Jedson finally gave up as impractical trying to submit our bill, and concentrated on the committees handling Ditworth's bills. I did not see much of him. He would go out at 4 in the afternoon to a cocktail party, and get back to the hotel at 3 in the morning, bleary-eyed, with progress to report. He woke me up on the 4th night and announced jubilantly,
It's in the bag, Archie.
"You killed those bills?"
Not quite. I couldn't manage that. But they will be reported out of committee, so amended that we won't care if they do pass. Furthermore, the amendments are different in each committee.
Well, what of that?
Well, that means that even if they do pass their respective houses, they will have to go to conference committee to have their differences ironed out. And then back for final passage in each house. The chances of that, this late in a short session, are negligible. Those bills are dead.
Jedson's predictions were justified. The bills came out of committee with a due pass recommendation late Saturday evening. That was the actual time. The State House clock had been stopped 48 hours before to permit first and second readings of an administration must bill. Therefore, it was officially Thursday. I know that sounds cockeyed, and it is, but I am told that every legislature in the country does it toward the end of a crowded session.
Do they?
The important point is that, Thursday or Saturday, the session would adjourn sometime that night. I watched Ditworth's bill come up in the Assembly. It was passed, without debate, in the amended form. I sighed with relief. About midnight, Jedson joined me and reported that the same thing had happened in the Senate. Sally was on watch in the conference committee room just to make sure that the bills stayed dead. Joe and I remained on watch in our respective houses. There was probably no need for it, but it made us feel easier. Shortly before 2 in the morning, Bodie came in and said we were to meet Jedson and Sally outside the conference committee room. "What's that?" I said, immediately all nerves. "Has something slipped?"
No, it's all right, and it's all over. Come on.
Joe answered my question, as I hurried up with Bodie trailing, before I could ask it.
It's okay, Archie. Sally was present when the committee adjourned sine die, without acting on those bills. It's all over. We've won.
We went over to the bar across the street to have a drink in celebration. In spite of the late hour, the bar was moderately crowded. Lobbyists, local politicians, legislative attachés, all the swarm of camp followers who throng the Capitol whenever the legislature is sitting, all such were still up and around, and many of them had picked this bar as a convenient place to wait for news of adjournment. We were lucky to find a stool at the bar for Sally. We three men made a tight little cluster around her and tried to get the attention of the overworked bartender. We had just managed to place our orders when a young man tapped on the shoulder. I just lost. There's something about the line breaks in this edition of the book that is really throwing me, paired with Heinlein's particular cadence. We had just managed to place our orders when a young man tapped on the shoulder the customer on the stool to the right of Sally. He immediately got down and left. I nudged Bodie to tell him to take the seat. Sally turned to Joe. "Well, it won't be long now. There go the sergeants at arms." She nodded toward the young man, who was repeating the process farther down the line. "What does that mean?" I asked Joe.
It means they are getting along toward the final vote on the bill they were waiting on. They've gone to call of the House now, and the Speaker has ordered the Sergeant at Arms to send his deputies out to arrest absent members.
Arrest them? I was a little bit shocked.
Only technically. You see, the Assembly has had to stall until the Senate was through with this bill, and most of the members have wandered out for a bite to eat or a drink. Now they are ready to vote, so they round them up.
A fat man took a stool near us which had just been vacated by a member. Sally said, "Hello, Don." He took a cigar from his mouth and said,
"How are you, Sally? What's new? Say, I thought you were interested in that bill on magic."
We were all four alert at once. "I am," Sally admitted. "What about it?"
"Well, then, you had better get over there. They're voting on it right away. Didn't you notice the call of the House?"
I think we set a new record getting across the street, with Sally leading the field in spite of her plumpness. I was asking Jedson how it could be possible, and he shut me up with,
"I don't know, man. We'll have to see."
We managed to find seats on the main floor back of the rail. Sally beckoned to one of the pages she knew and sent him up to the clerk's desk for a copy of the bill that was pending. In front of the rail, the assemblymen gathered in groups. There was a crowd around the desk of the oh my God! There was. I'm sorry, I'm having a very hard time today. I knew it was going to be rough because yesterday was rough, but geez Louise. This is embarrassing. I apologize. Thanks for tuning in, by the way, Reloy. I know you did it like an hour ago, and I'm sorry I didn't see it until now. In front of the rail, the assemblymen gathered in groups. There was a crowd around the desk of the administration floor leader, and a smaller cluster around the floor leader of the opposition. The whips had individual members buttonholed here and there, arguing with them in intense whispers. The page came back with the copy of the bill. It was an appropriation bill for the Middle Counties Improvement Project, the last of the must bills for which the session had been called. But pasted to it as a rider was Ditworth's bill in its original most damnable form. It had been added as an amendment in the Senate, probably as a concession to Ditworth's stooges in order to obtain their votes to make up the two-thirds majority necessary to pass the appropriation bill to which it had been grafted. The vote came almost at once. It was evident, early in the roll call, that the floor leader had his majority in hand and that the bill would pass. When the clerk announced its passage, a motion to adjourn sine die was offered by the opposition floor leader, and it was carried unanimously. The Speaker called the two floor leaders to his desk and instructed them to wait on the Governor and the presiding officer of the Senate with notice of adjournment. The crack of his gavel released us from stunned immobility. We shambled out. We got in to see the governor late the next morning. The appointment, squeezed into an overcrowded calendar, was simply a concession to Sally and another evidence of the high regard in which she was held around the capital. For it was evident that he did not want to see us and did not have time to see us. But he greeted Sally affectionately and listened patiently while Jedson explained in a few words why we thought the combined Ditworth-Middle Counties bill should be vetoed. The circumstances were not favorable to reasoned exposition. The governor was interrupted by two calls that he had to take, one from his director of finance and one from Washington. His personal secretary came in once and shoved a memorandum under his eyes, at which the old man looked worried, then scrawled something on it and handed it back. I could tell that his attention was elsewhere for some minutes after that. When Jedson stopped talking, the governor sat for a moment, looking down at his blotter pad, an expression of deep-rooted weariness on his face. Then he answered in slow words, "No, Mr. Jedson, I can't see it. I regret as much as you do that this business of the regulation of magic has been tied in with an entirely different matter, but I cannot veto part of a bill and sign the rest, even though the bill includes two widely separated subjects. I appreciate the work you did to help elect my administration." I could see Sally's hand in that remark, and wish that we could agree in this, but the Middle Counties project is something that I have worked toward since my inauguration. I hope and believe that it will be the means whereby the most depressed area in our state can work out its economic problems without further grants of public money. If I thought that the amendment concerning magic would actually do a grave harm to the state— He paused for a moment. "But I don't. When Mrs. Logan called me this morning, I had my legislative counsel analyze the bill. I agree that the bill is unnecessary, but it seems to do nothing more than add a little more bureaucratic red tape. That's not good, but we manage to do business under a lot of it. A little more can't wreck things." I butted in, rudely, I suppose, but I was all worked up. "But, Your Excellency, if you would just take time to examine this matter yourself, in detail, you would see how much damage it will do." I would not have been surprised if he had flared back at me. Instead, he indicated a file basket that was stacked high and spilling over. "Mr. Fraser, you see 57 bills passed by this session of the legislature. Every one of them has some defect. Every one of them is of vital importance to some or all of the people of this state. Some of them are as long to read as an ordinary novel. In the next 9 days I must decide what ones shall become law and what ones must wait for revision at the next regular session. During that 9 days at least 1,000 people will want me to see them about some of the— Oh, geez. During that 9 days at least 1,000 people will want me to see them about some one of those bills." His aide stuck his head in the door. "12:20, Chief. You're on the air in 40 minutes." The governor nodded absently and stood up. "You will excuse me? I'm expected at a luncheon." He turned to his aide, who was getting out his hat and gloves from a closet. "You have the speech, Jim?"
Of course, sir.
"Just a minute," Sally had cut in. "Have you taken your tonic?"
"Not yet."
"You're not going off to one of those luncheons without it." She ducked into his private washroom and came out with a medicine bottle. Joe and I bowed out as quickly as possible. Outside, I started fuming to Jedson about the way we had been given the runaround, as I saw it. I made some remark about dunderheaded, compromising politicians when Joe cut me short.
"Shut up, Archie. Try running a state sometime instead of a small business, and see how easy you find it."
I shut up. Bodie was waiting for us in the lobby of the Capitol. I could see that he was excited about something, for he flipped away a cigarette and rushed toward us.
"Look," he commanded, "down there."
We followed the direction of his finger and saw two figures just going out the big doors. One was Ditworth, the other was a well-known lobbyist with whom he had worked.
"What about it?"
Joe demanded.
"I was standing here behind this phone booth, leaning against the wall and catching a cigarette.
As you can see, from here that big mirror reflects the bottom of the rotunda stairs. I kept an eye on it for you fellas. I noticed this lobbyist, Sims, coming downstairs by himself, but he was gesturing as if he were talking to somebody. That made me curious, so I looked around the corner of the booth and saw him directly. He was not alone, he was with Ditworth. I looked back at the mirror and he appeared to be alone. Ditworth cast no reflection in the mirror.
Jedson snapped his fingers.
A demon, he said in an amazed voice, and I never suspected it.
Dun dun dwada.
I am surprised that more suicides don't occur on trains. When a man is down, I know of nothing more depressing than staring at the monotonous scenery and listening to the maddening tickety-tock, lickety-tock of the rails. In a way, I was glad to have this new development of Ditworth's inhuman status to think about. It kept my mind off poor Feldstein and his $1,000. Startling as it was to discover that Ditworth was a demon, it made no real change in the situation except to explain the efficiency and speed with which we had been outmaneuvered, and to confirm as a certainty our belief that the Racketeers and Magic Incorporated were two heads of the same beast. But we had no way of proving that Ditworth was a half-world monster. If we tried to haul him into court for a test, he was quite capable of lying low and sending out a facsimile or a mandrake, built to look like him and immune to the mirror test. We dreaded going back and reporting our failure to the committee, at least I did, but at least we were spared that. The Middle Counties Act carried an emergency clause which put it into effect the day it was signed. Ditworth's bill, as an amendment, went into action with the same speed. The newspapers on sale at the station when we got off the train carried the names of the new commissioners for thaumaturgy. Nor did the commission waste any time in making its power felt. They announced their intention of raising the standards of magical practice in all fields, and stated that new and more thorough examinations would be prepared at once. The association formerly headed by Ditworth opened a coaching school in which practicing magicians could take a refresher course in thaumaturgic principles and arcane law. In accordance with the high principles set forth in their charter, the school was not restricted to members of the association. That sounds big-hearted of the association. It wasn't. They managed to convey a strong impression in their classes that membership in the association would be a big help in passing the new examinations. Nothing you could put your finger on to take into court, just a continuous impression. The association grew. A couple of weeks later, all licenses were canceled and magicians were put on a day-to-day basis in their practice, subject to call for re-examination at a day's notice. A few of the outstanding holdouts against signing up with Magic Incorporated were called up, examined, and licenses refused them. The squeeze was on. Mrs. Jennings quietly withdrew from any practice. Bodie came around to see me. I had an uncompleted contract with him involving some apartment houses.
Here's your contract, Archie, he said bitterly. I'll need some time to pay the penalties for non-completion. My bond was revoked when they cancelled the licenses.
I took the contract and tore it in two. Forget that talk about penalties, I told him. You take your examinations and we'll write a new contract. He laughed unhappily.
Don't be a Pollyanna.
I changed my tack. What are you going to do? Sign up with Magic Incorporated? He straightened himself up.
I've never temporized with demons. I won't start now.
Good boy, I said. Well, if the eating gets uncertain, I reckon we can find a job of some sort here for you. For you. It was a good thing that Bodhi had some money saved, for I was a little too optimistic in my offer. Magic Incorporated moved quickly into the second phase of their squeeze, and it began to be a matter of speculation as to whether I myself would eat regularly. There were still quite a number of licensed magicians in town who were not employed by Magic Incorporated. It would have been an evident, actionable frame-up to freeze out everyone. But those available were all incompetent bunglers, not fit to mix a filter. There was no competent legal magical assistance to be gotten at any price, except through Magic Incorporated. I was forced to fall back on old-fashioned methods in every respect. Since I don't use much magic in any case, it was possible for me to do that, but it was the difference between making money and losing money. I had put Feldstein on as a salesman after his agency folded up under him. He turned out to be a crackerjack and helped to reduce the losses. He could smell a profit even farther than I could, farther than Dr. Worthington could smell a witch. But most of the other businessmen around me were simply forced to capitulate. Most of them used magic in at least one phase of their business. They had their choice of signing a contract with Magic Incorporated or closing their doors. They had wives and kids. They signed. The fees for thaumaturgy were jacked up until they were all the traffic would bear, to the point where it was just cheaper to do business with magic than without it. The magicians got none of the new profits. It all stayed with the corporation. As a matter of fact, the magicians got less of the proceeds than when they had operated independently. Sorry. As a matter of fact, the magicians got less of the proceeds than when they had operated independently, but they took what they could get and were glad of the chance to feed their families. Jedson was hard hit, disastrously hit. He held out, naturally, preferring honorable bankruptcy to dealing with demons, but he used magic throughout his business. He was through. They started by disqualifying August Welker, his foreman, then cut off the rest of his resources. It was intimated that Magic Incorporated did not care to deal with him, even had he wished it. We were all over at Mrs. Jennings late one afternoon for tea. Myself, Jedson, Bodie, and Dr. Royce Worthington, the witch smeller. We tried to keep the conversation away from our troubles, but we just could not do it. Anything that was said led back somehow to Ditworth and his damnable monopoly. After Jack Bodie had spent 10 minutes explaining carefully and mendaciously that he really did not mind being out of witchcraft, that he did not have any real talent for it, and had only taken it up to please his old man, I tried to change the subject. Mrs. Jennings had been listening to Jack with such pity and compassion in her eyes that I wanted to bawl myself. I turned to Jedson and said inanely, "How's Miss McGeoth?" She was the White Witch from Jersey City, the one who did creative magic in textiles. I had no special interest in her welfare. He looked up with a start.
Ellen, she's all right. They took her license away a month ago,"
he finished lamely. That was not the direction I wanted the talk to go. I turned it again. Did she ever manage to do that whole garment stunt? He brightened a little.
"Why, yes, she did. Once. Didn't I tell you about it?"
Mrs. Jennings showed polite curiosity, for which I silently thanked her. Jedson explained to the others what they had been trying to accomplish.
"She really succeeded too well," he continued. "Once she had started, she kept right on, and we could not bring her out of the trance. She turned out over 30,000 little striped sports dresses, all the same size and pattern. My lofts were loaded with them. 9/10 of them will melt away before I dispose of them. But she won't try it again, he added. Too hard on her health. How? I inquired. Well, she lost 10 pounds doing that one stunt. She's not hardy enough for magic. What she really needs is to go out to Arizona and lie around in the sun for a year. I wish to the Lord I had the money. I'd send her.
I cocked an eyebrow at him. Getting interested, Joe? Jedson is an inveterate bachelor, but it pleases me to pretend otherwise. He generally plays up, but this time he was downright surly. It showed the abnormal state of nerves he was in.
Oh, for cripes' sake, Archie! Excuse me, Mrs. Jennings, but can't I take a normal, humane interest in a person without you seeing an ulterior motive in it?
Sorry.
That's all right. He grinned. I shouldn't be so touchy. Anyhow, Ellen and I have cooked up an invention between us that might be a solution for all of us. I'd been intending to show it to all of you just as soon as we had a working model. Look, folks.
He drew what appeared to be a fountain pen out of a vest pocket and handed it to me. What is it? A pen?
No.
A fever thermometer?
No. Open it up.
I unscrewed the cap and found that it contained a miniature parasol. It opened and closed like a real umbrella, and was about 3 inches across when opened. It reminded me of one of those clever little Japanese favors one sometimes gets at parties, except that it seemed to be made of oiled silk and metal instead of tissue paper and bamboo. Pretty, I said, and very clever. What's it good for?
Dip it in water.
I looked around for some. Mrs. Jennings poured some into an empty cup, and I dipped it in. It seemed to crawl in my hands. In less than 30 seconds I was holding a full-sized umbrella in my hands and looking as silly as I felt. Bodie smacked a palm with a fist.
It's a Lulu, Joe. I wonder why somebody didn't think of it before.
Jedson accepted congratulations with a fatuous grin, then added, That's not all. Look. He pulled a small envelope out of a pocket and produced a tiny transparent raincoat, suitable for a 6-inch doll.
This is the same gag. And this.
He hauled out a pair of rubber overshoes less than an inch long.
A man could wear these as a watch fob, or a woman could carry them on a charm bracelet. Then, with either the umbrella or the raincoat, one need never be caught in the rain. The minute the rain hits them, presto, full size. When they dry out, they shrink up.
We passed them around from hand to hand and admired them. Joe went on.
Here's what I have in mind. This business needs a magician. That's you, Jack. And a merchandiser. That's you, Archie. It has 2 major stockholders. That's Ellen and me. She can go take the rest cure she needs, and I'll retire and resume my studies, same as I always wanted to.
My mind immediately started turning over the commercial possibilities. Then suddenly I saw a hitch. Wait a minute, Joe. We can't set up business in this state. No. It will take some capital to move out of the state. How are you fixed? Frankly, I don't believe I could raise $1,000 if I liquidated. He made a wry face.
Compared with me, you are rich.
I got up and began wandering nervously around the room. We would just have to raise the money somehow. It was too good a thing to be missed, and would rehabilitate all of us. It was clearly patentable, and I could see commercial possibilities that would never occur to Joe. Tents for camping, canoes, swimming suits, traveling gear of every sort. We had a gold mine. Mrs. Jennings interrupted in her sweet and gentle voice.
I am not sure it will be too easy to find a state in which to operate.
Excuse me? What did you say?
Dr. Royce and I have been making some inquiries. I am afraid that you will find the rest of the country about as well sewed up as this state.
What? 48 states?
Demons don't have the same limitations in time that we have.
That brought me up short. Ditworth again. Gloom settled down on us like fog. We discussed it from every angle, and came right back to where we had started. It was no help to have a clever new business. Ditworth had us shut out of every business. There was an awkward silence. I finally broke it with an outburst that surprised myself. "Look here!" I exclaimed. "This situation is intolerable. Let's quit kidding ourselves and admit it. As long as Ditworth is in control, we're whipped. Why don't we do something?" Jedson gave me a pained smile.
God knows I'd like to, Archie, if I could think of anything useful to do.
"But we know who our enemy is. Ditworth. Let's tackle him. Legal or not, fair means or dirty."
But that is just the point. Do we know our enemy? To be sure, we know he is a demon, but what demon, and where? Nobody has seen him in weeks.
Huh? But I thought just the other day.
Just a dummy, a hollow shell. The real Ditworth is somewhere out of sight.
But look, if he is a demon, can't he be invoked and compelled? Mrs. Jennings answered this time.
Perhaps, though it's uncertain and dangerous. But we lack one essential, his name. To invoke a demon, you must know his real name, otherwise he will not obey you, no matter how powerful the incantation. I have been searching the half-world for weeks, but I have not learned that necessary name.
Dr. Worthington cleared his throat with a rumble as deep as a cement mixer, and volunteered, "My abilities are at your disposal, if I can help to abate the nuisance." Mrs. Jennings thanked him.
I don't see how we can use you as yet, Doctor. I knew we could depend on you.
Jedson said suddenly, "White prevails over black." She answered,
Certainly.
"Oh, sorry."
White prevails over black.
She answered,
Certainly.
Everywhere?
Everywhere, since darkness is the absence of light.
He went on,
It is not good for the white to wait on the black.
It is not good.
With my brother Royce to help, we might carry light into darkness.
She considered this.
It is possible, yes, but very dangerous.
You have been there?
On occasion, but you are not I, nor are these others.
Everyone seemed to be following the thread of the conversation but me. I interrupted with, "Just a minute, please. Would it be too much to explain what you're talking about?"
There was no rudeness intended, Archibald, said Mrs. Jennings in a voice that made it all right. Joseph has suggested that, since we are stalemated here, we make a sortie into the half-world, smell out this demon, and attack him on his home turf.
Home ground, sorry. It took me a moment to grasp the simple audacity of the scheme. Then I said, "Fine, let's get on with it. When do we start?" When do we start? They lapsed back into a professional discussion that I was unable to follow. Mrs. Jennings dragged out several musty volumes and looked up references on points that were sheer Sanskrit to me. Judson borrowed her almanac, and he and the doctor stepped out into the back yard to observe the moon. Finally it settled down into an argument, or rather discussion. There could be no argument, as they all deferred to Mrs. Jennings' judgment concerning liaison. There seemed to be no satisfactory way to maintain contact with the real world, and Mrs. Jennings was unwilling to start until it was worked out. The difficulty was this. Not being black magicians, not having signed a compact with Old Nick, they were not citizens of the Dark Kingdom, and could not travel through it with certain impunity. Bodhi turned to Jedson. "How about elegant... I've been vanquished." "How about Ellen McGeeth?" he inquired doubtfully.
Ellen? Why, yes, of course. She would do it. I'll telephone her. Mrs. Jennings, do any of your neighbors have a phone?
"Never mind," Bodhi told him. "Just think about it for a few minutes so that I can get a Speaking of lines. Sorry about that. It was important. Bodie turned to Jedson. "How about Ellen McGeeth?" he inquired doubtfully.
Ellen? Why, yes, of course. She would do it. I'll telephone her. Mrs. Jennings, do any of your neighbors have a phone?
"Never mind," Bodie told him. "Just think about it for a few minutes so that I can get a line." He stared at Jedson's face for a moment, then disappeared suddenly. Perhaps 3 minutes later, Ellen McGeeth dropped lightly out of nothing.
"Mr. Bodie will be along in a few minutes," she said.
He stopped
to buy a pack of cigarettes."
Jedson took her over and presented her to Mrs. Jennings. She did look sickly, and I could understand Jedson's concern. Every few minutes she would swallow and choke a little, as if bothered by an enlarged thyroid. As soon as Jack was back, they got right down to details. He had explained to Ellen what they planned to do, and she was entirely willing. She insisted that one more session of magic would do her no harm. There was no advantage in waiting. They prepared to depart at once. Mrs. Jennings related the marching orders.
"Ellen, you will need to follow me in trance, keeping in close rapport. I think you will find that couch near the fireplace a good place to rest your body. Jack, you will remain here and guard the portal."
The chimney of Mrs. Jennings' living room fireplace was to be used as most convenient.
"You will keep in touch with us through Ellen."
"But, Granny, I'll be needed in the half—"
"No, Jack," she was gently firm. "You are needed here much more. Someone has to guard the way and help us back, you know. Each to his task."
He muttered a bit, but gave in. She went on.
"I think that is all. Ellen and Jack here, Joseph, Royce, and myself to make the trip. You will have nothing to do but wait, Archibald, but we won't be longer than 10 minutes, world time, if we are to come back."
She bustled away toward the kitchen, saying something about the unguent and calling back to Jack to have the candles ready. I hurried after her. "What do you mean?" I demanded. "About me having nothing to do but wait? I'm going along." She turned and looked at me before replying, troubled concern in her magnificent eyes.
"I don't see how that can be, Archibald."
Jedson had followed us and now took me by the arm.
See here, Archie, do be sensible. It's utterly out of the question. You're not a magician.
I pulled away from him. "Neither are you."
Not in a technical sense, perhaps, but I know enough to be useful. Don't be a stubborn fool, man. If you come, you'll simply handicap us."
That kind of an argument is hard to answer and manifestly unfair. "How?" I persisted.
"Hell's bells, Archie, you're young and strong and willing, but there is no one I would rather have at my back in a rough house, but this is not a job for courage or even intelligence alone. It calls for special knowledge and experience."
"Well," I answered, "Mrs. Jennings has enough of that for a regiment. But, if you'll pardon me, Mrs. Jennings, she is old and feeble. I'll be her muscles if her strength fails." Joe looked faintly amused, and I could have kicked him.
"But that is not what is required in—"
Dr. Worthington's double bass rumble interrupted him from somewhere behind us. "It occurs to me, brother, that there may be a possibility for our use of our It occurs to me, brother, that there may possibly be a use for our young friend's impetuous ignorance. There are times when wisdom is too cautious." Mrs. Jennings put a stop to it.
"Wait, all of you,"
she commanded, and trotted over to a kitchen cupboard. This she opened, moved aside a package of rolled oats, and took down a small leather sack. It was filled with slender sticks. She cast them on the floor, and the three of them huddled around the litter, studying the patterns.
"Cast them again,"
Joe insisted. She did so. I saw Mrs. Jennings and the doctor nod solemn agreement to each other. Jedson shrugged and turned away. Mrs. Jennings addressed me, concern in her eyes.
"You will go," she said softly. "It is not safe, but you will go."
We wasted no more time. The unguent was heated, and we took turns rubbing it on each other's backbone. Bodhi, as gatekeeper, sat in the midst of his pentacles, mechagrands, and runes, and intoned monotonously from the great book. Worthington elected to go in his proper person, ebony in a breechcloth, parasymbols scribed on him from head to toe, his grandfather's head cradled in an elbow. There was some discussion before they could decide on a final form for Joe, and the metamorphosis was checked and changed several times. He finished up with paper-thin gray flesh stretched over an obscenely distorted skull, a sloping back, the thin flanks of an animal, and a long bony tail, which he twitched incessantly. But the whole composition was near enough to human to create a revulsion much greater than would be the case for a more outlandish shape. I gagged at the sight of him, but he was pleased. "There!" There! He exclaimed in a voice like scratched tin.
You've done a beautiful job, Mrs. Jennings. Asmodeus would not know me from his own nephew.
"I trust not," she said. "Shall we go?"
How about Archie?
"It suits me to leave him as he is."
Then what about your own transformation?
"I'll take care of that," she answered somewhat tartly. "Take your places." Mrs. Jennings and I rode double on the same broom, with me in front, leaving the candle stuck in the straws. I've noticed All Hallows Eve decorations which show the broom with the handle forward and the brush trailing. That is a mistake. Custom is important in these matters. Royce and Joe were to follow close behind us. Seraphin leaped quickly to his mistress's shoulder and settled himself, his whiskers quivering with eagerness. Bodhi pronounced the word, our candle flared up high, and we were off. I was frightened nearly to panic, but tried not to show it as I clung to the broom. The fireplace gaped at us and swelled to a monster arch. The fire within roared up like a burning forest and swept us along with it. As we swirled up, I caught a glimpse of a salamander dancing among the flames, and felt sure that it was my own, the one that had honored me with its approval and sometimes graced my new fireplace. It seemed a good omen. We had left the portal far behind, if the word behind can be used in a place where directions are symbolic. The shrieking din of the fire was no longer with us, and I was beginning to regain some part of my nerve. I felt a reassuring hand at my waist and turned my head to speak to Mrs. Jennings. I nearly fell off the broom. When we left the house, there had mounted behind me an old, old woman, a shrunken, wizened body kept alive by an indomitable. I don't know why this is being so hard.
Rassum, frassum, grumble.
When we left the house, there had mounted behind me an old, old woman, a shrunken, wizened body kept alive by an indomitable spirit. She whom I saw now, she whom I now saw was a young woman, strong, perfect, and vibrantly beautiful. There is no way to describe her. She was without defect of any sort, and imagination could suggest no improvement. Have you ever seen the bronze Diana of the woods? She was something like that, except that metal cannot catch the live, dynamic beauty that I saw. But it was the same woman. Mrs. Jennings, Amanda Todd that was, at perhaps her 25th year, when she had reached the full maturity of her gorgeous womanhood, and before time had softened the focus of perfection. I forgot to be afraid. I forgot everything except that I was in the presence of the most compelling and dynamic female I had ever known. I forgot that she was at least 60 years older than myself, and that her present form was simply a triumph of sorcery. I suppose if anyone had asked me at that time if I were in love with Amanda Jennings, I would have answered, "Yes!" But at the time my thoughts were much too confused to be explicit. She was there, and that was sufficient. She smiled, and her eyes were warm with understanding.
She spoke, and her voice was the voice I knew, even though it was a rich contralto in place of the accustomed clear, thin soprano. "Is everything all right, Archie?" "Yes," I answered in a shaky voice. "Yes, Amanda, everything is all right." As for the half-world, how can I describe a place that has no single matching criterion with what I have known? How can I speak of things for which no words have been invented? One tells of things unknown in terms of things which are known. Here there is no relationship by which to link. All is irrelevant. All I can hope to do is tell how matters affected my human senses, how events influenced my human emotions, knowing that there are two falsehoods involved: the falsehood I saw and felt, and the falsehood that I tell. I have discussed this matter with Jedson, and he agrees with me that the difficulty is insuperable, yet some things may be said with a partial element of truth. Truth of a sort with respect to how the half-world impinged on me. There is one striking difference between the real world and the half-world. In the real world there are natural laws which persist through changes of custom and culture. In the half-world, only custom has any degree of persistence, and of natural law there is none. Imagine, if you please, a condition in which the head of a state might repeal the law of gravitation, and have his decree really effective. A place where King Canute could order back the sea and have the waves obey him. A place where up and down were matters of opinion, and directions might read as readily in days or colors as in miles. And yet it was not a meaningless anarchy, for they were constrained to obey their customs as unavoidably as we comply with the rules of natural phenomena. Sorry. We made a sharp turn to the left in the formless grayness that surrounded us in order to survey the years for a Sabbat meeting. It was Amanda's intention to face the Old One with the matter directly, rather than to search aimlessly through ever-changing mazes of the half-world for a being hard to identify at best. Royce picked out the Sabbat, although I could see nothing until we let the ground come up to meet us and proceeded on foot. Then there was light and form. Ahead of us, perhaps a quarter of a mile away, was an eminence surmounted by a great throne which glowed red through the murky air. I could not make out clearly the thing seated there, but I knew it was himself, our ancient enemy. We were no longer alone. Life, sentient, evil undeadness, boiled around us and fogged the air and crept out of the ground. The ground itself twitched and pulsated as we walked over it. Faceless things sniffed and nibbled at our heels. We were aware of unseen presences about us in the fog-shot gloom, beings that squeaked, grunted, and sniggered, voices that were slobbering whimpers, that sucked and retched and bleated. They seemed vaguely disturbed by our presence. Heaven knows that I was terrified by them. Heaven knows that I was terrified by them, for I could hear them flopping and shuffling out of our path, then closing cautiously in behind, as they bleated warnings to one another. A shape floundered into our path, and stopped, a shape with a great bloated head and moist, limber arms. "Back!" it wheezed. "Go back! Candidates for witchwood apply on the lower level." It did not speak English, but the words were clear. Royce smashed it in the face, and we stamped over it, its chalky bones crunching underfoot. It pulled itself together again, whining its submission, then scurried out in front of us and thereafter gave us escort right up to the great throne.
"That's the only way to treat these beings,"
Joe whispered in my ear.
"Kick 'em in the teeth first, and they'll respect you."
There was a clearing before the throne which was crowded with black witches, black magicians, demons in every foul guise, and lesser unclean things. On the left side the cauldron boiled. On the right some of the company were partaking of the witches' feast. I turned my head away from that.
Directly before the throne, as custom calls for, the witches' dance was being performed for the amusement of the goat. Some dozens of men and women, young and old, comely and hideous, cavorted and leaped an impossible acrobatic adagio. The dance ceased, and they gave way uncertainly before us as we pressed up to the throne. "What's this? What's this?" came a husky, phlegm-filled voice. "It's my little sweetheart. Come up and sit beside me, my sweet. Have you come at last to sign my compact?" Jedson grasped my arm. I checked my tongue. "I'll stay where I am," answered Amanda with a voice crisp with contempt. "As for your compact, you know better." "Then why are you here? And why such odd companions?" He looked down at us from the vantage of his throne, slapped his hairy thigh, and laughed immoderately. Royce stirred and muttered. His grandfather's head chattered in wrath. Seraphine spat. Jedson and Amanda put their heads together for a moment. Then she answered, "By the treaty with Adam, I claim the right to examine." He chuckled, and the little devils around him covered their ears. "You claim privileges here, with no compact?" "Your customs," she answered sharply. "Ah, yes, the customs. Since you invoke them, so let it be. And whom would you examine?" "I do not know his name. He is one of your demons who has taken improper liberties outside your sphere." "One of my demons, and you know not his name? I have 7,000,000 demons, my pretty. Will you examine them one by one, or all together?" His sarcasm was almost the match of her contempt. "Altogether." "Never let it be said that I would not oblige a guest. If you will go forward, let me see, exactly 5 months and 3 days, you will find my gentleman drawn up for inspection." I do not recollect how we got there. There was a great brown plain, and no sky. Drawn up in military order for review by their evil lord were all the fiends of the half-world, legion on legion, wave after wave. The Old One was attended by his cabinet. Jedson pointed them out to me. Lucifuge, the Prime Minister; Sataniaka, Field Marshal; Beelzebub and Leviathan, Wing Commanders; Ashtoreth, Abaddon, Mammon, Theutus, Asmodeus, and Incubus, the fallen thrones. The 70 princes each commanded a division, and each remained with his command, leaving only the dukes and the thrones to attend their lord, Satan McCratrigg. He himself still appeared as the goat, but his staff took every detestable shape they fancied. Asmodeus sported 3 heads, each evil and each different, rising out of the hindquarters of a swollen dragon. Mammon resembled, very roughly, a particularly repulsive tarantula. Ashtoreth I cannot describe at all. Only the incubus affected a semblance of human form, as the only vessel adequate to display his lecherousness. The goat glanced our way. "Be quick about it," he demanded. "We are not here for your amusement." Amanda ignored him, but led us toward the leading squadron. "Come back!" he bellowed. And indeed we were back. Our steps had led us no place. "You ignore the customs. Hostages first." Amanda bit her lip. "Admitted," she retorted, and consulted briefly with Royce and Jedson. I caught Royce's answer to some argument. "Since I am to go," he said, "it is best that I choose my companion, for reasons that are sufficient to me. My grandfather advises me to take the youngest. That one, of course, is Fraser."
What's this? I said when my name was mentioned. I had been rather pointedly left out of all the discussions, but this was surely my business.
Royce wants you to go with him to smell out Ditworth, explained Jedson.
And leave Amanda here with these fiends? I don't like it.
I can look out for myself, Archie, she said quietly. If Dr. Worthington wants you, you can help me most by going with him.
What is this hostage stuff?
Having demanded the right of examination, she explained, you must bring back Ditworth, or the hostages are forfeit.
Jedson spoke up before I could protest.
"Don't be a hero, son. This is serious. You can serve us all best by going. If you don't come back, you can bet that they'll have a fight on their hands before they claim their forfeit."
I went. Worthington and I had hardly left them before I realized acutely what little peace of mind I had came from the nearness of Amanda. Once out of her immediate influence, the whole mind-twisting horror of that place and its grisly denizens hit me. I felt something rub against my ankles and nearly jumped out of my shoes. But when I looked down, I saw that Seraphim, Amanda's cat, had chosen to follow me. After that, things were better with me. Royce assumed his dog pose when we came to the first rank of demons. He first handed me his grandfather's head. Once I would have found that mummified head repulsive to touch. It seemed a friendly, homey thing here. Then he was down on all fours, scalloping in and out of the ranks of infernal warriors. Seraphim scampered after him, paired up and hunted with him. The hound seemed quite content to let the cat do half the work, and I have no doubt he was justified. I walked as rapidly as possible down the aisles between adjacent squadrons, while the animals cast out from side to side. It seems to me that this went on for many hours, certainly so long that fatigue changed to a wooden automatism, and horror died down to a dull unease. I learned not to look at the eyes of the demons, and was no longer surprised at any outre shape. Squadron by squadron, division by division, we combed them, until at last, coming up on the left wing, we reached the end. The animals had been growing increasingly nervous. When they had completed the front rank of the leading squadron, the hound trotted up to me and whined. I suppose he sought his grandfather, but I reached down and patted his head. "Don't despair, old friend," I said. "We still have these." I motioned toward the generals, princes all, who were posted before their divisions. Coming up from the rear as we had yet to examine the generals of the leading divisions on the left wing. But despair already claimed me. What were half a dozen possibilities against an eliminated 7,000,000? The dog trotted away to the post of the nearest general, the cat close behind him, while I followed as rapidly as possible. He commenced to yelp before he was fairly up to the demon, and I broke into a run. The demon stirred and commenced to metamorphose, but even in this strange shape there was something familiar about it. "Ditworth!" I yelled, and dived for him. I felt myself buffeted by leather wings, raked by claws. Royce came to my aid, a dog no longer, but 200 pounds of fighting Negro. The cat was a ball of fury, teeth and claws. Nevertheless, we would have been lost, done in completely, had not an amazing thing happened. A demon broke ranks and shot toward us. I sensed him rather than saw him, and thought that he had come to succor his master, though I had been assured that their customs did not permit it. But he helped us, his natural enemies, and attacked with such vindictive violence that the gauge was turned to our favor. Suddenly it was all over. I found myself on the ground, clutching at not a demon prince, but Ditworth in his pseudo-human form. A mild little businessman, dressed with restrained elegance, complete to briefcase, spectacles, and thinning hair.
"Take that thing off me," he said testily.
That thing was grandfather. That thing was grandfather, who was clinging doggedly with toothless gums to his neck. Royce spared a hand from the task of holding Ditworth and resumed possession of his grandfather. Seraphon stayed where he was, claws dug into our prisoner's leg. The demon who had rescued us was still with us. He had Ditworth by the shoulders, talons dug into their bases. Talons dug into their bases. I cleared my throat and said, I believe we owe this to you. I believe we owe this to you. I had not the slightest notion of the proper thing to say. I think the situation was utterly without precedent. Oh, it gets wild. It gets wilder. The demon made a grimace that may have been intended to be friendly, but which I found frightening. Let me introduce myself, he said in English. I'm Federal Agent William Kane, Bureau of Investigation. I think that was what made me faint. Oh, every now and again, an author is like, yeah, here's a quick little sucker punch. Let me introduce myself, he said in English. I'm Federal Agent William Kane, Bureau of Investigation. The demon. I think that was what made me faint. I came to, lying on my back. Someone had smeared a salve on my wounds, and they were hardly stiff, and not painful in the least, but I was mortally tired. There was talk going on somewhere near me. I turned my head and saw all the members of my party gathered together. Worthington and the friendly demon who claimed to be a G-man held Ditworth between them, facing Satan. Of all the mighty infernal army, I saw no trace.
So it was my nephew Nebiros,
mused the goat, shaking his head and clucking.
Nebiros, you are a bad lad, and I'm proud of you. But I'm afraid you will have to try your strength against their champion now that they have caught you.
He addressed Amanda.
Who is your champion, my dear?
The friendly demon spoke up. That sounds like my job. I think not, countered Amanda. She drew him to one side and whispered intently. Finally, he shrugged his wings and gave in. Amanda rejoined the group. I struggled to my feet and came up to them. A trial to the death, I think, she was saying. Are you ready, Nebiros? I was stretched between heart-stopping fear for Amanda and a calm belief that she could do anything she attempted. Jedson saw my face and shook his head. I was not to interrupt. But Nebiros had no stomach for it. Still in his Ditworth form, and looking ridiculously human, he turned to the old one. I dare not, uncle. The outcome is certain. Intercede for me.
Certainly, nephew. I had rather hoped she would destroy you. You'll trouble me some day.
Then to Amanda.
Shall we say 10,000 years?
Amanda gathered our votes with her eyes, including me, to my proud pleasure, and answered, So be it. It was not a stiff sentence, as such things go, I'm told, about equal to 6 months in jail in the real world, but he had not offended their customs. He had simply been defeated by white magic. Old Nick brought down one arm in an emphatic gesture. There was a crashing roar and a burst of light, and Ditworth Nebiros was spread-eagled before us on a mighty boulder, his limbs bound with massive iron chains. He was again in demon form. Amanda and Worthington examined the bonds. She pressed a seal ring against each hasp and nodded to the goat. At once the boulder receded with great speed into the distance, until it was gone from sight.
That seems to be about all, and I suppose you will be going now,
announced the goat.
All except this one.
He smiled at the demon G-man.
I have plans for him.
Has anyone mentioned that channeling Satan is hard on the throat?
I have plans for him.
No. Amanda's tone was flat.
What's that, my little one? He has not the protection of your party, and he has offended our customs.
No.
Really, I must insist.
Satan McCratrigg, she said slowly, do you wish to try your strength with me?
With you, madam?
He looked at her carefully, as if inspecting her for the first time.
Well, it's been a trying day, hasn't it? Suppose we say no more about it. Till another time, then.
He was gone. The demon faced her. Thanks, he said simply. I wish I had a hat to take off. He added anxiously, do you know your way out of here?
Don't you?
No, that's the trouble. Perhaps I should explain myself. I'm assigned to the anti-monopoly division. We got a line on this chap Ditworth, or Neberos. I followed him in here, thinking he was simply a black wizard and that I could use his portal to get back. By the time I knew better, it was too late, and I was trapped. I had about resigned myself to an eternity as a fake demon. I was very much interested in his story. I knew, of course, that all G-men are either lawyers, magicians, or accountants, but all that I had ever met were accountants. This calm assumption of incredible dangers impressed me and increased my already high opinion of federal agents.
You may use you may use our portal to return, Amanda said. Stick close to us.
Then to the rest of us,
shall we go now?
Jack Bodie was still intoning the lines from the book when we landed.
8.5 minutes, he announced, looking at his wristwatch. Nice work. Did you turn the trick?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did, acknowledged Jensen, his voice muffled by the throes of his remetamorphosis. Everything that... But Bodie interrupted.
Bill Kine, you old scoundrel, he shouted. How did you get in on this party?
Our demon had shucked his transformation on the way and landed in his natural form, lean, young, and hard-bitten, in a quiet gray suit and snap-brim hat. "Hi, Jack," he acknowledged. "I'll look you up tomorrow and tell you all about it. Got to report in now." With which he vanished. Ellen was out of her trance, and Joe was bending solicitously over her to see how she had stood up under it. I looked around for Amanda. Then I heard her out in the kitchen and hurried out there. She looked up and smiled at me, her lovely young face serene and coolly beautiful. "Amanda," I said. "Amanda!" I suppose I had the subconscious intention of kissing her, making love to her. But it is very difficult to start anything of that sort unless the woman in the case in some fashion indicates her willingness. She did not. She was warmly friendly, but there was a barrier of reserve I could not cross. Instead, I followed her around the kitchen, talking inconsequentially, while she made hot cocoa and toast for all of us. When we rejoined the others, I sat and let my cocoa get cold, staring at her with vague frustration in my heart, while Jedson told Ellen and Jack about our experiences. He took Ellen home shortly thereafter, and Jack followed them out. When Amanda came back from telling them good night at the door, Dr. Royce was stretched out on his back on the hearthrug, with Seraphin curled up on his broad chest. They were both snoring softly. I realized suddenly that I was wretchedly tired. Amanda saw it too, and said, "Lie down on the couch for a little and nap if you can." I needed no urging. She came over and spread a shawl over me and kissed me tenderly. I heard her going upstairs as I fell asleep. I was awakened by sunlight striking my face. Seraphin was sitting in the window, cleaning himself. Dr. Worthington was gone, but must have just left, for the nap on the hearthrug had not straightened up. The house seemed deserted. Then I heard her light footsteps in the kitchen. I was up at once and quickly out there. She had her back toward me and was reaching up to the old-fashioned pendulum clock that hung on her kitchen wall. She turned as I came in. Tiny, incredibly aged, her thin white hair brushed neatly into a bun. It was suddenly clear to me why a motherly good-night kiss was all that I had received the night before. She had had enough sense for two of us, and had refused to permit me to make a fool of myself. She looked up at me and said in a calm, matter-of-fact voice, "See, Archie, my old clock stopped yesterday." She reached up and touched the pendulum, "but it is running again this morning." There is not anything more to tell. With Ditworth gone, and Kane's report, Magic Incorporated folded up almost overnight. The new licensing laws were an unenforced dead letter even before they were repealed. We all hang around Mrs. Jennings' place just as much as she will let us. I'm really grateful that she did not let me get involved with her younger self, for our present relationship is something solid, something to tie to. Just the same, if I had been born 60 years sooner, Mr. Jennings would have had some rivalry to contend with. I helped Ellen and Joe organize their new business, then put Bodie in as manager, for I decided that I did not want to give up my old line. I've built the new wing and bought those 2 trucks, just as Mrs. Jennings predicted. Business is good. And that was Magic Incorporated by Robert A. Heinlein. It's a cute one. Heinlein's views on female politicians notwithstanding. Yikes. Um, Unfortunately, with Heinlein, you have to take the good with the interesting. Uh, you have to take the interesting with the well, that's questionable. Um, he was a product of his era and a product of his beliefs, I guess. That's really it. Next week, I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do. Okay, that's not totally true. I have some ideas. I have ideas plural, and that's the problem. So I don't have one singular idea. I have many. Very possibly we will do, to keep the Heinlein train running, we'll do Starship Troopers. Why not? That's Mecha adjacent. After that, probably Armor by Stakely. And then All You Need Is Kill by Japanese guy whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, sorry. After that, I would like to get started on doing the Full Metal Panic series and narrate that, because that I'm pretty confident has not been narrated in any form by the end of the year. Armor is not too long, it's longish. Starship Troopers should only be a couple installments. That's not going to take very long. That's probably going to 6 on the outside. Armor will be a bit longer. So yeah, it's cute. Again, the main reason I did Magic Incorporated as well is because Waldo is super short, and Magic Incorporated is pretty short, and they're part of a. I don't think I've ever seen them as singleton stories, other than wherever they were originally printed, serialized. I assume they were serialized. Does this say? Let's see. Nah, it just says the copyrights. Copyright dates of 1940, 42, and 50. So yeah, Heinlein is tough because most older authors, like from the first half of the 20th century, are going to be kind of tricky. But just I figure it's safe enough to just say, hey, just keep in mind these people are products of their era. People believed certain things back then. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of them, but it's hard to separate that out. But I try to compartmentalize. Heinlein, of course, is a whole nother can of worms, which honestly is such a can of worms it's hard to go into without like really going over a large part of his body of work and being like, here's if these are things that he actually believed, and certainly he believed some of them, then he had certain beliefs, and those I think are optimistic at best when it comes to the more libertarian aspects. I won't say anything like misguided, because God knows I don't necessarily know better, but a lot of it just is like, how is that supposed to work in the real world? I'm sorry. And then, of course, there's the shit like, women politicians, they're facile. They don't make good judgments. It's like, okay, no. just no. That's flat out wrong. How are they any better than male politicians? How are they any worse than male politicians at that point? And I'm just like, come on now, come on now, come on now. Anyway, so next week probably, unless I have like a huge brainwave and say I'm going to do something totally different, because I've also got maybe the first two volumes of the Robotech novelizations, as well as God knows how many. I have a lot of the BattleTech novels that were done. Tons. There were so. It is unreal how many of those have been made over the years and are still made, bafflingly. I wouldn't call them high literature, to be honest. Some of them are a lot better than others. Um, the problem is I have to find where my good ones are because they're all kind of in a giant area and they're not organized because it's been forever since I've read them. I seem to recall most of the Michael Stackpole stuff as being pretty good. And if you recognize that name, that's because I'm pretty sure Stackpole has done a bunch of work on the Star Wars expanded universe. There's a bunch of names you're going to see from like the 80s and 90s that like have lots of cross pollination all over the place. Like Kevin J. Anderson's a great example. It's like this dude was doing the quote official fan fiction unquote circuit for a long time. Um, he has his own stuff, but like I think most people know Kevin J. Anderson from, well, modern now. They probably know him from the Dune prequels and postquels that he did with Brian Herbert. But otherwise, I just lost my entire train of thought. Don't worry about it. It wasn't important. So yeah, Wednesdays, I'm gonna keep on cracking through A Hero Born, Legends of the Condor Heroes, Volume 1 by Jin Yong. We are almost done. Let me check to see how many more installments we have. It's not many. I think we have like three? Three, possibly? It's not a ton. We're most of the way through that. After I finish that, I plan on doing something special that I'm not going to name just as yet. There's two. Um, I've mentioned it before in passing, but I'm not going to re-mention it to keep from spoiling the surprise. Mostly because it's, I think it's cute. Um, and actually kind of in the Wuxia Wednesdays martial fantasy theme reasonably well. Yeah, it is three, I think. Yeah, it'll be three total more installments for A Hero Born. Um, so that'll be nice. I've done Star Wars stuff. I've only done a couple stories. Mostly I do the short story stuff. Um, most of the expanded universe, as far as I'm concerned, at least from before like the year 2000, is fair game as far as I'm concerned. Mostly because a lot of it I don't think is in print anymore in any way, shape, or form. Um, I could definitely be persuaded to do the Thrawn trilogy. I could be persuaded to do the Jedi Academy trilogy. Those are quite good, I think, by and large. There's a couple singleton novels that are pretty decent. Honestly, the stars of the show, as far as Star Wars Expanded Universe, are the Tales of short story compilations. Those are so good. Um, even when they're like, just like Tales of the Mos Eisley Cantina, Tales of Jabba's Palace, and Tales of the Bounty Hunter, or like The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. They're so good. Um, it should be. I don't think I have it in a. I don't have it in its own playlist, other than in the general. I think that was the original Free Read Fridays, way back before I turned it to Storytime Saturdays, or it's in Storytime Saturdays. I'm not sure. I only did. Did I only do one? I might have only done the Tale of IG-88. I think, therefore, I am. It is there though. It should be on the YouTube. In my thing. I would not mind going back and doing that at some point. I just have to find an excuse. Um, maybe I'll do that for Wordy Wednesdays after I get through the couple things that I want to get through for that. Um, but those are pretty good. Who wrote that one? I don't remember now. My copy of it's behind a couple other things, so I'd have to dig it out. I know where it is. I'm like looking at the area it's at with laser vision. Yeah, IG-88 it should be under, but I might not have properly. Here, give me a sec. I'm gonna look it up real quick. Where are you? Probably. Don't do that. Don't do that, Frank. That's gonna take you forever. Starfish, 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 starfish. Okay, it's not showing up there. Let me try. Are you really not going to let me go farther out than that? That's obnoxious. This is going to take me a minute. Free Form Fridays, I think, might have been the one I did it under. I'm checking right now. That doesn't help me. Did I just... This was before I started titling what they were. That's useless. Okay, Gregg Egan, Gregg Egan, Gregg Egan. Here we go. Is this it? I think I split it. It's like one of my first several. And this was before I had like a better better schema for titling and labeling things that I've yeah, here we go. I'm pretty sure this is it. What? Okay, well, I did that one too, apparently. I don't remember doing the Tales of Jabba's Palace one. That's cool. Yeah, give me a sec. I'll post links in a moment. Wow, I just grabbed from a story from all three, and then I think I called it good. That's sort of upsetting. What did I do after that? Is that when I started doing Gregg Egan? Yeah, that's when I started doing Gregg Egan. Okay. Okay, one sec. Let me get these posted. I'm pretty sure this is the tale of IG-88. Come on. Really? Thank you. Copy video link. Iggy. Copy. Barada and the Weequays. And I don't honestly know which one I did for Tales of the Mos Eisley Cantina. I have no idea. So I'm just gonna Mos Eisley Cantina. So those are super old. So quality not guaranteed. Suffice it to say. I haven't gone back and listened to these in forever. Ever, in fact. I probably should do that. Older interface before I had settled into a comfortable pattern. Oh, I don't need that one. There we go. So those are all there. I should have those all downloaded somewhere. I'm going to double check my assumed location for the downloads just to make sure that's where they are. Where was I putting those? I think that was recordings, right? Oh, good. I just didn't label them properly. All right, now I need to find where they are. Neat. Okay, that's 115. That's the old ones. Here they are. Those were episodes what? I may have to re-download those. Oh no, there they are. I just don't know how to read. Okay, yes, no, I have them all. When I've I've put a lot of the setting up like a Discord server and all that on hold because via Discord I can easily get things to people pretty readily. I'll have to find some upload service to use, probably Google Docs or something. I don't know, or Google Drive. Set up several Google Drives, as the case may be, and then make that viable. And that way I can actually get the hard recordings to people. They are kind of chunky because of the download quality that I went with. So they're, let's see, how big is that? That's, how big are you? Yeah, that's like 3 gigabytes for a file because I'm doing them as video output. I strictly speaking don't have to do that, but it preserves the background image, and occasionally that's relevant. But shouldn't matter too much. Anyway, eventually I'll get that stuff set up. Because of some lifestyle changes, I've had to put some of that on hold. It wouldn't take me long to do. I'm just lazy, and I procrastinate a lot. Oh God, do I procrastinate? So anyway, those are there. To anyone tuning in after the fact and listening to all this blather, I don't know why you would listen to the blather, but if you do, I do these live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, starting at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, or UTC -5. You can catch me live then, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So, with that, I'm going to call it for the day. We will continue this on Wednesday, where again I am reading more of A Hero Born by Jin Yong, which is the first volume of Legends of the Condor Heroes. Yeah. Oh, and on Fridays, right now we're reading through Instantiation, a short story collection by Gregg Egan. I think people are going to generally like many of the stories in this, as he doesn't get overly esoteric. Um, you don't need um, I am having a really hard time right now. My brain just is like, yeah, you know exactly where you're going with that sentence. We'll just let your mouth go. And then my mouth is like, wait a minute. What was I supposed to do? It's like, you'll figure it out. Cool. Basically, the curly-haired boss from Dilbert, that is my consciousness, is getting in the way again. Um, where were we? Oh, right. Um, they're not. They're a bit more understandable than some of his more esoteric work. You'll know what I mean when I say really esoteric Gregg Egan. If I ever start doing like Diaspora or Terranesia, I think was the other. Oh, Shield's Ladder is another one where it's like, I don't really get what's going on, but it's pretty cool, and it's delivered fairly well so that you feel like you might understand what's going on. Anyway, you don't need a STEM background to understand some of what's being discussed, at any rate. Or an in-depth STEM background, are you kidding? Gregg Egan is a toughie. He's hard to recommend, but I like to plug him all the time because I think he's really worth reading, because he opens up new horizons that you may not have known were there. And that's nice. That's good. Okay, with that, I'm going to dip. Thanks again for tuning in. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. Oh no, giving out $10 for each bug found. Ah, 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 ah. You fool. What have you done? That's a good way to bankrupt the company. Very quickly. Oh boy. I mean, oh, would that my boss, back when I was working for a certain company, had done something similar. My goodness. Goodness gracious. I could have retired early. And it's because I built the thing. The thing didn't work. Well, I built part of the thing. I actually bootstrapped. as one does. Bootstrapped someone else's work, and then made it conform to my will and demands. Has anyone mentioned that programming certain things is basically magic? I'm going to write myself a new fit minivan. Exactly. Exactly. That's it right there. That's it. Anyway, again, thanks. Yeah. Until next time. Mañana. Well, day after mañana, whatever. Until next time. We'll leave it there. Bye.